tell you what I think. It's cold-blooded murder. Cold-blooded murder, young man.
What does true justice look like? In most disturbing sentences of all time, we uncover the chilling cases where the punishment is as shocking as the crime. From unthinkable acts to courtroom moments that will leave you stunned, these sentences are unforgettable. Stay tuned, because one of these cases will have you questioning everything you thought about justice.
Mr. Ridgway, how do you plead to the charge of aggravated murder in the first degree as charged in count 1 for the death of Wendy Lee Caulfield?
Guilty.
Gary Ridgway is considered the second most prolific killer in United States history. Also known as the Green River Killer, Ridgway murdered somewhere between 71 and 99 adult workers between 1982 and 1998. He seemed to have an undisclosed hatred for adult workers and prostitutes, as these were all of his victims. Gary Ridgway's childhood was anything but ordinary. His father complained about the presence of adult workers often. His mother was described as a domineering woman, and relatives said that Ridgway may have witnessed more than one violent argument between his parents.
He talked about having some sexual feelings towards her. He described in some detail watching her when she was in a bathing suit and looking at her and thinking that she dressed pretty provocatively.
Ridgway had a bedwetting problem until he was 13 years old. After every episode, his mother used to forcefully wash his private parts. This was what probably introduced Ridgway into a love-hate relationship with sexual intimacy. He told psychologists later on that he had conflicted feelings of anger and attraction toward his mother, and would consider killing her, fantasizing about it. When Ridgway was 16, he stabbed a 6-year-old boy through his ribs into his liver. The boy survived the attack, and Ridgway didn't face severe consequences. He was married 3 times to 3 different women. Ridgway and his second wife had a son together, but their marriage failed because Ridgway was constantly unfaithful.
So I whipped out my ID, and with my ID would be I'd put my finger over my driver's license to hide my name. But on the opposite side was pictures.
In the 1980s, Ridgway targeted adult workers in Washington and gained their trust by showing them a photo of his son. He would lure them into his car, and when they traveled far enough, Ridgway killed them. He either strangled them with his hands or used garrotes. Afterward, he would dump their bodies in wooded areas and often go back to engage in necrophilia before eventually burying his victims. It was later revealed that even though Ridgway claimed to hate adult workers, he would engage in intercourse with his victims before killing them. After 6 women were found this way, a task force was opened to try and find him. Despite this, Ridgway would not be arrested for these serial killings for almost 20 years. Even though he was a suspect as early as 1982, he somehow stayed free. He also passed a polygraph test in 1994, therefore reducing the suspicion towards him. In 2001, because of advances in DNA testing technology, investigators were able to re-examine evidence from the crime scenes and found abundant DNA belonging to Ridgway. On November 30th, 2001, Ridgway was arrested as he was leaving his workplace. The investigation lasted a long time because in an earlier interview, he claimed that he had murdered at least 71 people. He didn't cooperate with police as they'd like, and he eventually cut a deal with the police.
Mr. Ridgway, how do you plead to the charge of aggravated murder in the first degree as charged in count 1 for the death of Wendy Lee Caulfield?
Guilty.
Eventually, he took a plea deal in exchange for providing information on where to find the remains of his other victims. Ridgway pled guilty to 48 counts of aggravated first-degree murder. The plea deal also spared him the death penalty in exchange for more information about his victims.
There are people here that hate you. I'm not one of them. You've made it difficult to live up to what I believe, and it is what God says to do, and that's to forgive. You are forgiven.
During his sentencing, Ridgway admitted to killing at least 71 adult workers. Ridgway showed no emotion whatsoever. He pleaded guilty to all 48 counts. During victim impact statements, Ridgway remained mostly emotionless. However, when the father of one of his victims said he forgave him, Ridgway became emotional and cried a bit. Ultimately, he was sentenced to 48 life sentences and 10 years each for tampering with the evidence of those 48 cases he pleaded guilty to. He's serving his sentence in the Washington State Penitentiary. Gary Ridgway's horrifying spree of killing shocked the world, but the next case turns to a chilling act of familial betrayal.
She was having a mental health crisis.
She doesn't know what was going on at that time. We're asking you to find her not guilty by reason of insanity.
Prosecutors say she shot her mother, Ashley Smiley, a 40-year-old high school math teacher, in the face.
On March 19, 2024, a friend of 14-year-old Carly Gregg reached out to Ashley Smiley, Carly's mother, expressing concerns about her daughter's excessive use of marijuana. The friend revealed that Carly had been indulging in the drug and using burner cell phones, raising alarms about their well-being. Determined to act, Ashley decided to confront her daughter about the rumors. After speaking to Carly's friend, Ashley made her way to Carly's bedroom. What she discovered there shocked her. Several vape pens lay scattered across the bedroom. Alarmed, Ashley quickly wanted answers.
The jury seeing 5 days of disturbing evidence, including this surveillance video. First, you see Gregg with a gun behind her back, pacing around the home.
That afternoon, security camera footage from inside the home captured a chilling scene. Carly, dressed in a Nirvana t-shirt, moved around the house, seemingly hiding something behind her back. It turned out to be a .357 Magnum handgun. As Carly walked out of view from the camera, the sound of 3 gunshots shattered the silence. The footage then showed Carly rushing back to the kitchen, where she sat calmly on the stool at the counter. She took out her phone and texted a friend, asking them to come over because there was an emergency. When Carly's friends arrived at the house, Carly asked them if they had ever seen a dead body. Without further explanation, Carly took them into her mother's bedroom, where Ashley lay lifeless, her face soaked in blood. According to this friend, Carly confessed that her stepfather, Heath Smiley, was next on her list. Using her dead mother's phone, Carly, pretending to be her mother, sent a message to Heath. The message read, "When will you be home, honey?" Little did Heath know that this message was a carefully crafted trap.
Her stepfather, Heath Smiley, coming home moments later, Gregg also shooting him.
When Heath arrived at the front door, Carly ambushed him, shooting her stepfather in the shoulder. Despite the injury, Heath managed to take control of the situation. He overpowered Carly and took the gun away from her, ultimately saving his own life. In a panic, Heath called for help. Police officers arrived swiftly, along with paramedics. Carly was arrested on the spot. As investigators delved into Carly's background, they discovered a diary that shed light on her darkest thoughts. The journal revealed a list of beliefs that painted a chilling picture of Carly's twisted mind. Among these beliefs were statements such as, "There is no God," "It's okay to be evil," and "There is no need for family." The prosecution offered Carly a 40-year plea deal before her trial. However, she declined the offer. Carly's case quickly gained media attention, and the trial commenced 6 months later, in September 2024.
Tonight, a Mississippi teen sentenced to life in prison without parole for murdering her mother and attempting to kill her stepfather.
During the trial, the prosecution presented a compelling argument, painting Carly Gregg as a calculating and cold-hearted killer. They alleged that Carly intentionally shot and killed her mother, Ashley, after Ashley discovered her secret marijuana use. The prosecution described Carly as a dangerous young lady who showed no remorse for her actions and planned the attack on her stepfather.
We, the jury, sentenced the defendant Carly Madison Gregg to life imprisonment.
The defense, on the other hand, presented a different narrative to the court. They claimed that Carly was in the midst of mental health struggles at the time of the crimes. A psychiatrist testified that Carly's mood swings were exacerbated by the medication she was taking. This psychiatrist argued that Carly's actions were not premeditated, but were driven by her unstable mental state. According to the psychiatrist, Carly's mental health struggles played a significant role in her violent actions. To support this claim, the defense presented Carly's journals as evidence, which revealed a young woman in mental turmoil.
I need to get some information from you. What is her name again?
Carly, C-A-R-L-Y.
C-A-R-L-Y?
Carly Madison.
During the trial, the prosecution presented the body cam footage captured by the police officers at the scene. The video depicted the chaotic aftermath of the murders as officers arrived at the scene and conducted their investigation. Carly sat at the defense table. She stared intently, her eyes fixed on the screen. As Carly watched the footage, tears welled up in her eyes. The once composed and confident teenager was overcome with emotion. One of the key witnesses in Carly's trial was her stepfather, Heath.
Went off in my face before the door was, 3 or 4 inches wide open.
Heath testified about the tragic events that led to his wife's murder. He stated that despite Carly's actions, he still had a good relationship with her. This statement shocked the public, as it seemed incomprehensible that he could maintain a bond with someone who had shot him and taken the life of his wife. In their closing argument, the prosecution reminded the jury that Carly knew the difference between right and wrong when she committed the murder. After careful consideration, the jury deliberated for less than 2 hours before delivering their verdict. They returned a guilty verdict, finding Carly guilty beyond a reasonable doubt. Carly, who was only 15 years old, was found guilty of first-degree murder. Speaking to WLBT in an exclusive interview, Kevin Gregg, Carly's biological father, said he was embarrassed, angry, upset, and very sad about his daughter's actions. Currently, Carly is being held in the Youthful Offender Unit at the Central Mississippi Correctional Facility. The defense attorneys have indicated that they plan to appeal Carly's conviction. However, given the severity of her crime and the public outcry, it seems unlikely that the appeal will successfully overturn the verdict. Carly Madison's unthinkable betrayal shocked everyone, but the next case is just as chilling. Michael Swanson, a teenager whose cold-blooded actions left 2 innocent victims dead.
It's cold-blooded murder. Cold-blooded murder, young man.
It's not uncommon to see a teenager commit a robbery, but 17-year-old Michael Swanson would take it too far when he not only robbed 2 convenience stores, but ended up gruesomely murdering the attendants. His reaction to being sentenced for these crimes sent shockwaves down the spine of everyone in court. On Monday, the 15th of November, 2010, at the age of 17, Michael Swanson allegedly stole his mother's car and his grandfather's .40 caliber handgun and drove to northern Iowa in search of a thrill. Just after 9 p.m. that day, a young man wearing a ski mask walked into a Crossroads gas station in Algona, Iowa, where he demanded cash and cigarettes from the clerk, 47-year-old Vicki Bowman Hall. Despite complying with his request, the young man chose to shoot her anyway, leaving her for dead as he fled the scene in a Jeep Grand Cherokee. About an hour later, the same young man appeared at a come-and-go convenience store in Humboldt, about 30 miles south of Algona, where he once again demanded cash from the clerk, this time 61-year-old Sheila Myers. Despite Myers handing him the cash he'd asked for, he had already made up his mind just like the prior incident and shot her anyway, in the face, from only 2 feet away. She died instantly and he quickly fled the scene once again. That young man turned out to be 17-year-old Michael Swanson. Before committing those murders, Swanson had driven from St. Louis Park to northern Minnesota to Iowa in a car he had stolen from his mother, Kathleen, along with her debit cards earlier that morning. This wasn't the first time he had stolen his mother's car, his mother, Kathleen, testifying that he'd had violent and sometimes criminal tendencies since he was a toddler. When he was only 11, she was told by a psychiatrist that he was a lost cause when she reported to them that he was a threat to their family members. Swanson had been clinically diagnosed with a host of mental disorders, including ADHD and bipolar disorder, amongst others. One time in 2006 for assembling and storing dangerous weapons, which his aunt discovered in a car trunk after she demanded the money he had stolen from her nonprofit organization where he was doing community service. These dangerous behaviors were a well-known ticking time bomb that would eventually lead Swanson to his downfall. During the second murder, police had received reports of the first from witnesses and began tracing the trail to Swanson. Swanson had managed to get to a McDonald's in Webster City, about 60 miles from Algona, before he was caught and arrested. The police officers also recovered the stolen money and cigarettes, as well as the handgun he used in perpetrating the murders. When interrogated over the murders, Swanson told the police that he shot them so they wouldn't be able to call police or identify him. During his prosecution, Swanson showed no remorse over his actions, as he confessed there was a deliberate attempt to murder Myers. Swanson was eventually charged with 2 counts of first-degree murder and 2 counts of robbery. At his first hearing over the murder of Myers in June 2011, the jury reached a quick verdict and Swanson was found guilty of both charges, after which he flipped off the TV cameras. At his second trial that July, he was also found guilty of the robbery and murder of Bowman Hall. For his role in the murders of Myers and Bowman Hall, a then 18-year-old Swanson was handed 2 life sentences without the eligibility of parole. During his sentencing, Swanson could be seen smiling and laughing as his verdict was read.
Blooded murder, young man. And your counsel wants us to believe that you lack the capacity, that you were insane.
Jillian, the daughter of Bowman Hall, confronted Swanson in an emotional statement, calling him a weak coward.
My mom was not only completely 100% innocent, but she was also a defenseless woman when you came in with that gun.
Johnson reportedly told a psychiatrist that he had been fascinated by murder and committing acts of violence since he was 13, and intended to wait until he was 18 so he could kill his parents, who he had planned to be his first victims. In 2013, Swanson's sentence was revised to 60 years before parole eligibility by the governor of Iowa, Terry Branstad, who decided to commute the life sentences of 38 Iowa inmates who had been convicted as juveniles. In November 2014, Swanson was charged with attempted murder while in prison for attacking a fellow inmate with a knife. He was convicted of this charge in 2015 and sentenced to an additional 25 years in prison. He will be eligible for parole in 2089 at the age of 96. Michael Swanson's senseless violence was deeply unsettling, but the next case takes us to an even darker place. James Holmes, a man whose calculated and devastating attack on a crowded movie theater claimed countless lives.
It's 12 consecutive life sentences without the possibility of parole, and then those life sentences are also consecutive to 3,318 years in the Department of Corrections.
The story of James Holmes proves that having a happy home and a good education does not always mean being capable of good things. James Holmes is an American mass murderer, responsible for the 2012 Aurora theater shooting. James killed 12 people and injured 70 others at a Century 16 movie theater on July 20th, 2012. James's childhood was a comfortable one. His father is a mathematician and scientist, while his mother is a registered nurse. Holmes grew up fairly comfortably and lived a fairly affluent life in San Diego. However, as he grew older, Holmes began to develop mental health issues. He attempted suicide at 11 because he was scared of what he called nail ghosts, which would hammer on his walls at night. After a while, Holmes began to display even more disturbing habits, like obsessing over killing for a long time. Despite these issues, Holmes graduated in the top 1% of his class at the University of Illinois. He was a member of several honor societies and eventually received a grant to study neuroscience as a PhD student at the University of Colorado Anschutz Medical Campus in Aurora. It was during this period that Holmes began to exhibit more signs of schizotypal personality disorder strongly. He also made constant jokes about killing people and how he wanted to kill as many as possible. Holmes was also obsessed with movies and theaters. He would employ this to carry out one of the most horrific mass murders in America. On July 19th, Holmes went to the movie theater, paid for a ticket, and went inside. After a while, he snuck out of an exit door and returned with weapons, gas, and smoke canisters. He set off the canisters before closing the door and opening fire on the theater audience. He had planned to kill the audience past midnight because he didn't want to kill children and knew that they wouldn't be in the cinema at that time. He killed 12 people and wounded 70 people before going to stand next to his car, waiting for the police to arrest him.
Targets, random. Method, bombs with the word X'd out, and in parentheses, too regulated and suspicious.
Holmes was arrested and charged with 24 counts of first-degree murder, 116 counts of attempted murder, possession of explosive devices, and inciting violence. Investigation revealed that Holmes had planned the killing for weeks and even sent his notebook detailing his plan to his psychiatrist on the day of the mass murder.
It's 12 consecutive life sentences without the possibility of parole, and then those life sentences are also consecutive to 3,318 years in the Department of Corrections.
Holmes was found guilty of all charges on July 16, 2014. Because of the circumstances, Holmes's lawyers begged the jurors to consider mental illness in his sentencing, even though his insanity plea was rejected. Ultimately, instead of being sentenced to death, James Holmes was sentenced to 12 consecutive life sentences and 3,318 years without the possibility of parole. As Holmes was led away from the courtroom, the families of the victims cheered. James Holmes's calculated and devastating attack left a community shattered, but the next case is equally disturbing. Craig Ross Jr., a man whose actions in a horrifying kidnapping case revealed a chilling disregard for human life.
If you're going to meet the new population of people you'll be staying with for the next 47 years, keep exercising, build strength, and know every person you will meet in your new living quarters knows exactly what you did.
The worst kind of sexual offenders are pedophiles, and in the case of Craig Ross Jr., his despicable actions altered the lives of a family in Saratoga, Wyoming. In September 2023, a 9-year-old girl went missing while she was riding her bike in Moreau State Park. Her family had been camping at the site before she suddenly disappeared. A search was conducted, and immediately the girl's parents discovered that she was missing. It was soon realized that she was abducted. The breakthrough in the abduction came just after 4 a.m. on October 2nd when someone drove by the girl's family residence and placed a ransom note in the mailbox demanding $50,000. A trooper guarding the residence saw the man drop off the note, but by the time he checked it and realized what had happened, the unidentified man had slipped away in his pickup. After a check was run on the note, the fingerprint identified the man as 46-year-old Craig Ross Jr. 10 hours after this, state police found the girl where she was being held hostage. Ross had stuffed her in a camper on his mother's property in Milton. The 9-year-old was found alive on October 2nd. While they were happy that their daughter had been found, they were horrified to discover that she had been sexually assaulted by Ross. He was ultimately arrested and charged with first-degree kidnapping and predatory sexual assault against a child.
For you to meet the new population of people you'll be staying with for the next 47 years. Keep exercising, build strength, and know every person you will meet in your new living quarters knows exactly what you did. Good luck, and God will not have mercy on your soul.
In the courtroom, Ross decided to avoid trial and pleaded guilty to all the charges against him. Notwithstanding, if he had gone to trial, he would have been found guilty anyway. However, it was considered a good thing because the young girl was spared the horrors of having to recount what she suffered. At sentencing, the victim's uncle delivered a powerful impact statement, telling Ross how excited he was for him to meet the new population of people he'd be living with in prison.
I used to be the prey, and you were the predator. Now I'm the predator, and you're the prey. I hope you know I hate your guts.
In the clip you just watched, Assistant District Attorney Jennifer Buckley read the statement from the victim that would make you righteously furious. She drew parallels between what Ross did to her and his punishment. According to Ross's claims, he had just been fired from his job when he saw the 9-year-old and decided to abduct her so he could make some money from getting ransom. The claim implied that the crime he committed was impulsive and that he did not plan what he did. Ross didn't say anything to the family of the victim or even an apology. Ultimately, Craig Ross Jr. was sentenced to 47 years to life in prison for kidnapping and sexual assault. He will spend the rest of his life behind bars. Craig Ross Jr.'s chilling kidnapping case was horrifying, but the next story reveals an unimaginable act of betrayal. Erin Caffey, a teenager who orchestrated the destruction of her own family in a shocking act of violence.
He got tired of them bickering and said, just do it. Is that true? I'm sorry?
Yes.
16-year-old Erin Caffey did the unthinkable because of love. Caffey was working as a part-time waitress when she met 18-year-old Charlie Wilkinson. Things became serious between them and Charlie gave Caffey a promise ring. Erin's parents didn't like the relationship because they felt that something about Wilkinson was off. Because of their suspicions, they went online to see what they could find about Wilkinson. They found out that his page was littered with sexual references and talks about drinking alcohol. Because of this, Erin became scared that her parents would stop her from seeing Wilkinson, so she started talking about killing her family. On March 1st, 2008, Erin carried her evil plan out with the help of Wilkinson and his friend, Charles Wade. Wilkinson claimed that even though he suggested that they should run away, Caffey said they should kill her parents instead. So on that day, Wilkinson and Wade entered Caffey's house while they were sleeping and shot her parents multiple times. When Caffey's mother didn't die immediately, Wade used a samurai-style sword and almost decapitated her. This killed her immediately.
He was to get revenge because we made him break up with our daughter. I heard my son Matthew cry out. He said, Charlie, why are you doing this? No, Charlie, no, please, why are you doing this?
Wilkinson and Wade shot Tyler, Erin's younger brother, and took turns slicing Erin's other brother, Matthew, till he died. Wilkinson and Wade then set fire to the house before leaving with Erin and Wade's girlfriend. Tyrie Caffey, Erin's father, survived the attack and told the officers that Charlie Wilkinson had attacked them. Charlie Wilkinson was found in his trailer and he was arrested. Erin was in the trailer as well, but she claimed that she had been kidnapped. Charles Wade and his girlfriend were arrested as well. However, the horrific revelation came after the police interrogated the four of them. Erin's story quickly fell apart because Wilkinson and Wade told the same story. Erin had orchestrated the murders. Caffey insisted that she had nothing to do with the murders.
I honestly believe that she was not the mastermind, and I'm not saying that out of denial because it's my daughter, but I don't believe my daughter's evil.
In the end, Wilkinson and Wade were sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. Caffey, on the other hand, was sentenced to life in prison with the possibility of parole after 40 years. Her father, who survived the attack, forgave her, saying that she was manipulated by Wilkinson. Now we turn to Christine Paolilla's case, a young woman whose jealousy and obsession led to a brutal, calculated massacre.
I had made the gun go off, not purposely though, but like it went to the back of the room because I was like screaming, just like shaking.
So somehow you pulled the trigger?
Yes.
Okay.
This is Christine Paolilla, and she just confessed to a mass murder that had happened 3 years prior. In this clip, she is a nervous wreck, but is not always so. Christine had done well after years of ridicule and bullying. Paolilla was diagnosed with alopecia in kindergarten, and this caused her to lose her hair, eyebrows, and eyelashes. She had to wear wigs because of hair loss. She also had poor vision and wore thick glasses. All of this contributed to her being bullied by her classmates. Paolilla lost self-confidence, and it was not until 2003 that things began to improve.
Christine came home one day, very happy. She said, "Mom," she said, "I made 2 new friends who are the sweetest girls I've ever met." I said, "Who are they?" She said, "Oh, Rachel and Tiffany."
Christine enrolled at Clear Lake High School in Houston, where she met Rachel Coloradis and Tiffany Rowell. Rachel and Tiffany were the school's popular girls and helped her change her appearance and fit in with the rest of the school. This greatly helped, and Christine became popular among the students. Her friendship with Tiffany and Rachel turned things around so much that she was voted Miss Irresistible by her school's student body. But her good streak wouldn't last long, because it was that year that she started dating 21-year-old Christopher Lee Snyder. Christine was only 17 when this illegal relationship started. Christine's relationship caused her parents concern because Snyder was a drug addict and had a lengthy criminal record. Her parents disapproved because they felt that Paolilla would be influenced. She was. She began to use drugs and develop anger issues. On July 18, 2003, things would take a turn for the worse when Christine and Snyder went drug hunting at Tiffany's home. Tiffany, Rachel, Tiffany's boyfriend Marcus Priscilla, and Marcus's cousin Edelbert Sanchez were at the home before Christine and Snyder arrived. The two of them planned to steal drugs from Tiffany's home that night. However, Snyder got into an argument with Marcus, and this led to the shootings of the 4 teens who had been in the house. They were shot by Snyder and Christine.
The kids themselves, drenched in blood. There's blood spatter that's on the walls. There's bullet holes from rounds that have gone into the victims and outside of them.
Rachel attempted to call 911 but was hit in the head by Paolilla with the butt of a gun that was used to shoot her. The rest died almost immediately before fleeing. As for the teens, they were considered victims of a drug deal gone wrong. In 2004, Paolilla entered rehab where she met Stanley Rott, a heroin user. Her relationship with Snyder ended when the latter was jailed for stealing a car. She got married to Rott in 2005. Paolilla came into a trust fund of $360,000 that had been left to her by her father. She used part of the money to buy an apartment. It was in this home that Paolilla would discover on the news that the case of her friend's murder was still open. She confessed to Rott and told him what happened. Because of this, they went into hiding. In 2006, Paolilla and her husband were arrested. Paolilla for the murders and her husband for the 70 vials of heroin that were found in their room. Rott told the police that Paolilla had confessed to him. After Paolilla was interrogated, she confessed to killing her friends. However, she said that Snyder had made her do it.
I had made the gun go off, not purposely though, but like it went to the back of the room because I was like screaming, just like shaking.
So somehow you pulled the trigger?
Yes.
Okay.
Snyder himself was never caught. When he was informed that the police had a search warrant out for him, he committed suicide by overdose in 2006. Paolilla was spared the death penalty because she was a minor at the time of the killings. Paolilla was convicted of 4 counts of capital murder on October 13, 2008. On October 14th, she was sentenced to life in prison with a minimum of 40 years in prison. Christine Paolilla's calculated massacre was horrifying, but the next case takes us to another kind of darkness.
Bright red hair and freckles made him a target at school for years, and as a teenager he was seen peddling around town for hours on end alone.
On August 2, 1993, in upstate New York, 13-year-old Eric Smith made a tragic choice that would change his life forever. While riding his bike to camp, he encountered a 4-year-old boy named Derek Roby, who was also going to the same camp. Without hesitation, Eric lured Derek into an isolated wooded area. Once secluded from prying eyes, Eric proceeded to strangle Derek, drop a large rock on his head, and sodomize him with a stick. The brutality of this act was unimaginable, even for the most hardened criminals. To add insult to injury, Eric reached into Derek's lunchbox, pulled out a Kool-Aid packet, and poured it into Derek's wounds. At 11 a.m., Derek's mother arrived at the camp to pick up her son, only to find him missing. Panic set in as she realized that her son never made it there. A full-scale search was launched, with authorities desperately seeking clues and any information about Derek's whereabouts. 4 hours later, the search party stumbled upon a horrific sight: Derek's lifeless body. Derek's cause of death was determined to be blunt force trauma and asphyxia. The entire community was engulfed in grief and outrage. About 1 week later, Eric Smith broke the silence and confessed to his mother that he had committed the heinous crime. Eric's mother, horrified by her son's actions, immediately informed the police. Given the ages of both Eric and Derek, the murder became a headline-grabbing story, captivating the attention of the nation. As the media coverage intensified, Eric's face became synonymous with pure evil. Despite barely being a teenager, Eric was charged as an adult for his heinous crime. The prosecution and defense conducted extensive medical tests on Eric, hoping to find any indicators that might shed light on his alleged violent tendencies. However, despite the thorough examinations, the results showed nothing unusual. It perplexed the prosecution and defense teams, leaving more questions than answers. During Eric's trial in 1994, the defense psychiatrist presented alarming evidence that they claimed to have diagnosed Eric with intermittent explosive disorder. This condition is characterized by sudden, uncontrollable outbursts of rage, often resulting in violent behavior. However, the prosecution called an expert who testified that this disorder is rarely seen in children Eric's age. The conflicting testimony further fueled speculation about Eric's mental state and whether he was truly capable of such heinous acts. After weeks of intense deliberation, the jury finally reached a verdict on August 16, 1994. Eric was found guilty of second-degree murder and was sentenced to 9 years to life in prison, the maximum sentence allowed for juvenile offenders at that time. In a letter addressed to Derek's parents, Eric expressed deep remorse for his actions. He wrote if he could go back in time, he would switch places with Derek and endure all the pain he had caused.
It was directed at all the other guys who used to pick on me. And when I was torturing and killing Derek, that was what I saw in my head.
For the next 27 years, Eric was denied parole multiple times. In October 2021, Eric's luck began to change. He was granted parole, sparking widespread outrage and disbelief among the citizens of the small upstate New York town where Derek was murdered. During the parole hearing, Eric shocked everyone by revealing that he had been engaged to an attorney since 2019. In February 2022, Eric Smith's release became official. After serving 27 years in prison, he was finally set free. However, the news of his impending release was met with resistance by the small town citizens. Determined to make their voices heard, they held peaceful protests to let Eric know they did not want to see him back in their community. The outrage and concern were palpable as residents expressed their fears and unease about the impending release of someone who had committed such heinous crimes. Doreen Roby, Derek's mother, faced the harsh reality of her son's killer being set free. Despite her pain, Doreen vowed to shield herself from further torment. She explained that she doesn't allow Eric Smith to take up space in her head, as she doesn't care where he is or what he's doing as long as he remains distant from her friends and family. Today, Eric Smith is a free man living in New York City's Queens neighborhood. Despite his controversial release, he has avoided the spotlight and maintained a low profile. However, the scars left by his actions remain etched in the hearts of the victims and their families. Eric Smith's shocking crime at such a young age was chilling, but the next case is even more horrifying. Martin Bryant, a man responsible for one of the deadliest mass shootings in history, leaving 35 victims dead.
You being responsible for killing those people.
It's horrendous.
Martin Bryant is an Australian mass murderer who shot and killed 35 people and injured 23 people on the 28th and 29th of April 1996. Bryant was born in Hobart, Tasmania in May 1967, and from a young age, he was described as a disturbed child. According to his mother, she would find his toys broken, and she described him as an annoying and infuriating child. A psychiatrist who examined Bryant told his family that he would not be able to hold down a job because he would make people provoked and so angry to the extent that he would always be in trouble. Bryant was fascinated with fire, guns, and violence in general. Things would take a turn for the worse when Martin became a teenager. He began to torture animals and bully younger children. At some point, Bryant had pulled the snorkel from a child's nose while diving. He also cut down trees on a neighbor's property because it looked fun. This disturbing behavior continued until he was an adult. After another psychiatric examination, Bryant was found to be borderline mentally disabled with an IQ of 66, which was equivalent of that of an 11-year-old. Because of this, Bryant remained under the supervision of his parents until his father mysteriously passed away in 1993. After this, Bryant started living alone and became extremely lonely. He grew tired of this and allegedly told a next-door neighbor that he would do something to make everyone remember him. On April 28, 1996, Martin Bryant carried out one of the deadliest mass murders in history at the Port Arthur Historic Site in Tasmania. Before he went to Port Arthur, Bryant killed a couple that his father had told him about a long time ago. According to him, David and Nolene Martin had bought a bed and breakfast that would have greatly helped his family.
Take the shotgun.
Stay inside. I'm pretty sure someone's got a gun.
There's somebody going crazy shooting people here.
After that, he went to Port Arthur and entered a cafe on the site. After he was done eating, he went to the back room, set up a video camera, brought out a Colt AR-15 SP1 rifle, and started shooting. In under 15 seconds, Bryant killed 12 people and wounded 10. He went to the other side of the shop and fired more shots, killing 8 more people and wounding 2. Bryant left the cafe and continued to shoot more people. He killed 10 more before leaving Port Arthur. After hours of hiding in the bed and breakfast that belonged to the Martins, Bryant was eventually apprehended. By that time, 35 people had been killed and 23 others were injured. Despite the initial diagnosis that Bryant was mentally disabled, he was deemed fit to stand trial. Initially, Bryant pleaded not guilty. However, he was persuaded by his attorney to plead guilty. 2 weeks later, Bryant was sentenced to 35 life sentences plus 1,652 years in prison without the possibility of parole. He will live the rest of his natural life in prison. Martin Bryant's horrific mass shooting left a nation in shock, but the next case is equally disturbing.
Austin Smith was killed last week, just days shy of his 2nd birthday.
10-year-old Dylan Shoemaker is accused of murdering Smith, who would have turned 2.
In March 2013, Dylan Shoemaker, a 16-year-old, was babysitting his girlfriend's son, Austin Smith, who was nearly 2 years old. Austin's birthday was just 4 days away, but unfortunately he would never celebrate his 3rd birthday. According to Austin, he lost his cool with the toddler, leading to a horrific chain of events.
Tonight, we get our first look at the 16-year-old who's accused of killing a little boy in Springville.
At his trial, Dylan claimed that he became frustrated with Austin and resorted to slapping him, spanking him, and ultimately slamming the boy into the floor. As if that weren't enough, Dylan proceeded to punch the toddler in the head several times, all in an attempt to get the child to stop crying. The injuries sustained by Austin proved to be fatal, with his cause of death being ruled as blunt force trauma.
Deputies upon arrival immediately noted the bruising about the face and head of the child.
Dylan Shoemaker was arrested and faced charges of 2nd-degree murder and 1st-degree assault. He entered a not guilty plea. In December 2013, Dylan faced trial for the murder of Austin Smith. The tragic incident had left everyone in shock and disbelief.
I didn't mean to kill Austin. Ashley, I really didn't think I did this. I didn't mean to hurt him.
As the trial began, Dylan's defense attorney made a plea to the jury to find Dylan guilty on a lesser charge, which would have given Dylan freedom someday. Yet, despite the defense's best efforts, the jury returned a verdict of 2nd-degree murder. At the sentencing hearing, Dylan was sentenced to 25 years to life in prison.
Dylan Shoemaker walked into a state Supreme courtroom pleading his case, telling his victim's mother and the court he's remorseful for what he did.
When the verdict was read, relatives of baby Austin cried from the gallery. Austin Smith's grandmother even expressed sympathy for Dylan, saying he was only 16 and his life was now over before it even started.
Shoemaker and his defense attorney fought for the minimum sentence, 15 years to life.
I can't take back what was done. I wish I could. I would give my life for Austin.
According to Dylan's attorney, Dylan was subdued after hearing that he had been found guilty of 2nd-degree murder. However, a news report from Buffalo News paints an entirely different picture of this young murderer. The state Supreme Court justice who sentenced Dylan admitted that he had 13 letters written by witnesses and relatives who called Dylan a manipulator and deceiver. These letters revealed him to be a cunning and manipulative young man, completely different from what was presented during the trial. Further, in a viral video, Dylan claimed because he was a blonde, all he needed to do was cry for a lenient sentence. Dylan Shoemaker's tragic crime was driven by rage, but the next case reveals a chilling act of calculated revenge. Diana Lovejoy, a woman who meticulously plotted the murder of her husband in a twisted quest for freedom.
Guilty of the crime of conspiracy to commit murder.
Diana Lovejoy, a fitness instructor and YouTuber, was in a strained relationship with her ex-husband, Gregg Mulvihill. As the pair battled over details concerning their contentious divorce, including the custody of their young son. Lovejoy, born on the 26th of October 1972, had dated Mulvihill for a year before the couple got married in 2007. However, the marriage faced problems right from the start, as Lovejoy suffered numerous miscarriages before she finally had a son. And within 7 years of their marriage, Lovejoy had filed for divorce. The long court case following the divorce filing only strained the relationship between the couple further, as the initial full custody and child support benefits granted to Lovejoy for their then 3-year-old son was changed for the couple to share instead. Lovejoy was also required to pay Mulvihill $120,000 as she kept their family house in Carlsbad, California. Lovejoy did pay Mulvihill the required sum, but she never wanted to share custody of her only child, so, in a surprising twist, she hatched a sinister plan to execute her ex-husband. On the 4th of September 2016, Mulvihill received a call from someone pretending to be a private investigator who threatened him with alleged evidence of his mistreatment towards his wife, which could be used against him in court. The caller was able to convince Mulvihill to go to a remote location near Rancho Santa Fe to collect the evidence. And on reaching there with his friend Jason around 11 p.m., Mulvihill was shot in his side after spotting someone in the bushes. However, the bullet missed his heart and he was able to survive the shooting. Investigations into the attempted murder were conducted, and it was quickly concluded from the evidence found, such as cell tower data, that Lovejoy had been involved in the attempted murder. The man behind the gun was also discovered to be former Marine, as well as Lovejoy's gun instructor and lover, Weldon McDavid, who had made a run for it after his failed attempt. The AR-15 rifle he used was later found in his garage. After the pair were arrested a week later, it was revealed that Lovejoy had paid McDavid $2,000 to assassinate her ex-husband to get him out of the picture with concerns over their son. During a court hearing, Lovejoy alleged that Mulvihill had mistreated her and her young son. However, both Mulvihill and the prosecutors disapproved of the claims. Investigators discovered surveillance footage of Lovejoy from less than a month before the attempted murder, where she purchased the burner phone which McDavid had used to call Mulvihill on that fateful night. And on the 13th of November 2016, a jury found Lovejoy and McDavid guilty of attempted murder and conspiracy to commit murder. Video footage captured from the courtroom showed Lovejoy's unexpected reaction when the verdict on her charges was pronounced. Immediately, the guilty verdict was read. Lovejoy, who had been staring blankly ahead while sitting beside her attorney, suddenly slumped as her head hit the desk. There were murmurs of both shock and concern around the courtroom, as it had appeared that Lovejoy had gone unconscious. Court officers had to rush to lay her on the floor before she was eventually rushed to the hospital, where it was confirmed that she had fainted. Lovejoy was eventually sentenced in December to 26 years in prison, while McDavid received a 50-year sentence for being the one who pulled the trigger on Lovejoy's husband. Diana Lovejoy's calculated plot to eliminate her husband was chilling, but the next case takes a wild turn. Ricky Hand, a man who, after being sentenced, pulled off an outrageous stunt in the courtroom that left everyone stunned.
You just gave it 4 years. Well, guess what? Sir, what's this?
Showing up to receive sentencing for a previous crime should have been all that Ricky Hand got in the courtroom the day of his sentencing, not adding more years to them. In Springfield, Ohio, 46-year-old Ricky Hand was being sentenced for multiple robberies committed over a significant period of time. He had robbed multiple convenience stores at night where he made away with money and other things. Ricky had committed up to 30 robberies and had been arrested for some of them. He was out on parole when he committed the one that put him back in the courtroom. He had attempted to rob John's drive-thru one night. The store owner was closing for the night, oblivious to the fact that an armed Ricky Hand was lurking around the building, waiting for his opportunity to strike. However, as Ricky made his way to the door, the store owner was waiting for him, armed as well, and began to fire at Ricky to scare him off.
This is John's drive-thru, West Main Street. A guy just tried to rob me and I shot him. He ran out the back door. Okay, is he injured? I think I hit him.
It didn't take long before Ricky had to get the bullet wound treated, so he went to a hospital. It was at this hospital that Ricky was arrested for attempting to rob the shop. He admitted to robbing the store, and the case was taken to the courtroom. Ricky was sentenced to 40 years in prison, and the reason he was given such a lengthy sentence was because he had pleaded guilty to 7 robberies earlier in 2016.
Did you just give me 40 years, sir? Yes. You just gave me 40 years. Well, guess what? Sir, what's this?
In retaliation, Ricky pulled out bottles that contained his feces and urine, which he flung at his attorney and the officers around. He was quickly tackled and subdued by the deputies present. As a result of this action, Ricky Hand was charged with an additional 5 counts of harassment with bodily substance. He had attacked his attorney and 4 deputies with his waist. He was also charged with obstructing official business and retaliation. The fact that he had stored these bottles in his arm sling caused the judge to ask that the law enforcement agents intensify their searches before letting anyone into the courtroom next time. Ricky Hand's violent crime was shocking, but the next case is even more disturbing.
All right, Ms. Bjorg, you are charged with 2 felony warrants for murder, 2 felony warrants for aggravated assault.
On April 8, 2017, Gwinnett County, Georgia experienced the shocking and brutal double murders of 63-year-old Randall and Wendy Bjorg. The two were grandparents to 17-year-old Cassandra Bjorg. They had gotten legal custody because she had issues with her parents. Despite the grandparents' best efforts to give Cassandra a good life, she became more troubled and would run away from home from time to time. She also brought home drugs and assaulted her grandmother on multiple occasions. She also had a boyfriend, 19-year-old Johnny Ryder, who she ran away with many times. The couple were described as volatile and toxic. Eventually, they committed worse crimes. On April 8th, the police responded to an assault case in a home in Lawrenceville, and the victims identified the attackers as Johnny Ryder and Cassandra Bjorg. The two of them had attacked Johnny's sister and her boyfriend with a baseball bat and pepper spray before escaping. The car they used to escape belonged to Wendy and Randall, and this led the police to force their way into the home, as they expected the worst. To their horror, they found the bodies of Wendy and Randall. The two of them had been stabbed multiple times. Their autopsies showed that they had suffered blunt force to the head and various cuts around their throats. Everyone was horrified that something like that had happened in their community. Cassie and Johnny became the main suspects in the case, and a day after the Bjorgs were found, their granddaughter and her boyfriend were found after they barricaded themselves inside an apartment. They refused to come out, and by the time the SWAT team was able to get a visual, they found out that the teens were injured in the bathroom as they had tried to commit suicide. They failed this attempt and were taken to the hospital. The two of them were charged with the murders of Cassie's grandparents. The interrogation revealed some shocking details that showed that the murder had been premeditated.
It seems that you're sorry you got caught, that you had people over after. You don't seem to be sorry that you killed your grandparents.
Cassie told the police that they had planned to murder her grandparents and keep their bodies from being discovered. According to Cassandra, she and Johnny waited until her grandparents were asleep before entering their bedroom, duct taping and attacking them. The murder weapons included a tire iron, a baseball bat, a hammer, and butcher knives. The two of them beat and stabbed the Bjorgs to death. What's even more horrific is that after the murders, Cassandra sealed the windows and doors with caulk to keep the smell of the decomposing bodies from coming out.
And then we came back to the house.
When you guys left, where'd you guys go to?
We went over to like Kroger or Publix to go get something to eat, and then we went back to the house and we just kind of like chilled there.
Which one?
It was like on Old Peachtree.
Johnny and Cassie then ordered takeout and invited their friends to the house for a party. She also said that they smoked a lot of weed to mask the smell of the bodies, as they were in the house for more than a week.
Things like just seemed different. They didn't look at me the same anymore. Like they didn't, I don't know. It's like the vibe that they have was like they didn't really know what to do. They didn't really know like how to be around me. I guess they didn't really know how to talk to me.
The motive for the murder was shocking. Cassie said she killed her grandparents because they were too strict. She also said that her grandparents weren't the only intended victims. According to her, she and Johnny had planned to kill Johnny's family and Cassandra's mother. They both took a plea deal and didn't go to trial. Both of them were sentenced to 2 life sentences, each with the possibility of parole after 60 years. When the two heard their sentences, their reactions were different from each other. While Johnny apologized for what he did, Cassie was said to have been crying and refused to say anything even when she was given the chance to speak. The two would be eligible for parole in 2077. Johnny Ryder and Cassandra Bjorg's brutal crime was devastating, but the next case takes us into the heart of law enforcement corruption.
A judge sentenced Sergeant Wayne Jenkins to 25 years in federal prison.
You have a gun in? Probably, I would say 2 1/4 just by looking at it.
Inside the Baltimore Police Department, a sinister underworld was thriving. 8 police officers were found to be running an organized crime ring. Their nefarious activities orchestrated by none other than Wayne Jenkins. Wayne Jenkins, the head of the Gun Trace Task Force, wasn't your typical cop. His name became synonymous with corruption. Planting evidence was just the beginning. He masterminded robberies and even stole drugs from looted pharmaceutical companies.
Newly released videos show the officers pretending to open a safe for the first time.
Hey, Sarge! Hey, come downstairs right quick. They're about to get it open.
But in fact, prosecutors say they'd already gotten in, took $100 grand for themselves, then pretended this was the first time they'd laid eyes on the cash.
The Gun Trace Task Force was established with a noble purpose, but under Wayne Jenkins, its mission was twisted beyond recognition. Instead of upholding the law, Jenkins and his crew became the very criminals they were supposed to apprehend. Robbing people at gunpoint, stealing and selling drugs, they raked in over $1 million. But the trail of devastation they'd left didn't stop at financial gain. It included a haunting human toll. Recovered body camera footage revealed a harrowing encounter. Jenkins and his team attempting to rob 2 men in a car. The victims, desperate to escape, sped off. Jenkins pursued relentlessly, crashing into their vehicle and causing the death of Albert Davis. This reckless act not only shattered the lives of those directly involved, but also inflicted immeasurable pain on the victims' families, exposing the profound betrayal and corruption at the heart of Baltimore's police force. 7 years after the tragic incident, Davis's daughter was asked if she could ever trust the police again. Her response was poignant and revealing.
7 years later, we find out that corrupt cops who swore to protect and serve were nothing more than criminals. He apologized for it, Mr. Jenkins, but it still hurts.
But this is only part of the story. The real question is, how did years of organized crime go unnoticed within the police force? And how were they finally exposed? Surprisingly, the unraveling of this corrupt empire began with one man. His actions set off a chain of events that would eventually bring Jenkins and his crew to justice, revealing the extent of their betrayal. The turning point came with the conviction of a man who stole the that claimed a teenager's life. When the evidence was reviewed, wiretaps revealed a startling discovery. The voices of Wayne Jenkins and his 7 co-conspirators were heard repeatedly during the intercepted conversations. As investigators delved deeper, it became clear that the Gun Trace Task Force was entangled in far more than just rogue actions. They were key players in a sophisticated drug operation. It was uncovered that one of the task force members, Mamadou Gondo, had been providing protection to the drug crew, allowing them to expand their illegal enterprise into a lucrative $1 million operation. This revelation was the linchpin that exposed the depths of the corruption and criminality that had infiltrated Baltimore's police force. In addition to the damning recordings, investigators uncovered irregularities in official records, suggesting tampering. With the overwhelming evidence piling up, the FBI had enough to arrest and indict the corrupt task force members. Wayne Jenkins was finally tried and sentenced to 25 years in prison on June 7, 2018. Witnesses described him crying during his sentencing, pleading with the judge for mercy. He had confided in his attorney that he couldn't face a life sentence because of his children. His lawyer noted Jenkins showed signs of remorse, reportedly telling the judge he was ashamed of his actions. This dramatic fall from grace marked the end of one of the most notorious corruption cases in Baltimore's history, bringing some measure of justice to the victims and their families. Wayne Jenkins' shocking corruption rocked the Baltimore Police Department, but he wasn't acting alone. Enter the Gun Trace Task Force, better known as the Goon Squad.
In the last hour, 6 former Mississippi officers were sentenced to 15 to 45 years in prison on state charges in the assault and torture of 2 black men. The officers pleaded guilty to charges including hindering prosecution, burglary, home invasion, and aggravated assault.
These 6 men, known as the Goon Squad, left many stunned with their choice of name, given their roles as law enforcement officers. The crimes they committed are so egregious and disturbing they will make your blood boil.
5 former deputies and 1 police officer entered this home, no warrant, no evidence that anything was happening there. And they proceeded to torture these men for hours using food, at one point a sex toy, and threatening an execution.
On January 24, 2023, in Mississippi, the so-called Goon Squad, comprising officers Brett McAlpin, Hunter Elward, Christian Dedman, Jeffrey Middleton, Daniel Opdyke, and Joshua Hartfield, inflicted brutal and inhumane torture on Michael Jenkins and Eddie Parker for over an hour and a half. The officers, under the guise of a law enforcement operation, had responded to a report alleging that Jenkins and Parker had entered the home of Christy Wally, a childhood friend of Parker who had been paralyzed. Parker, her caretaker, was unjustly targeted. The Goon Squad forcefully broke down the front door and restrained Jenkins and Parker without a search warrant, initiating a horrific sequence of events. Wally was in the hospital when this horrific incident happened. The Goon Squad referred to Jenkins and Parker with slurs and insults while beating and torturing the men. Opdyke found an adult toy in the house and forced it into Parker's mouth. Another of the officers, Christian Dedman, threatened to the men, and he attempted until he realized that Jenkins had defecated on himself. If you thought this was all, you're wrong. Elward held the two men down and watched as Desmond poured cooking oil, eggs, chocolate syrup, and milk, among other kitchen ingredients, on them. Officer Joshua Hartfield also subjected Jenkins and Parker to further torment by using a taser on them while they were restrained. After nearly 2 hours of relentless torture, the officers ordered Jenkins and Parker to take a shower to conceal the evidence of their cruelty. Unfortunately for the victims, the horror was far from over. Elward forced his gun into Jenkins' mouth and fired, despite a failed initial attempt. The bullet inflicted severe damage, tearing through Jenkins' mouth, shattering his jaw, and exiting through his neck. Before fleeing the scene, the Goon Squad planted a gun and drugs in the home, falsely accusing Jenkins of having fired at them first. The Goon Squad then took the security footage from the house and discarded it in a river to destroy evidence of their crimes. They ultimately pleaded guilty to multiple felony charges, including deprivation of rights under color of law and obstruction of justice, among others. Lead attorney Malik Shabazz described the case as one of the worst he had ever encountered. The sentencing process was lengthy and overdue. Despite their guilty pleas in August 2022, the Goon Squad did not face sentencing until March 2024. As their sentences were read, the Goon Squad displayed a range of reactions. Brett McAlpin, who was considered the de facto leader or mafia don of the group, was sentenced to over 27 years in prison. His voice reportedly trembled as he addressed the court. The victims had described McAlpin as a tyrant or a king due to his commanding presence and his role in directing the other deputies during the torture. The rest of the Goon Squad acknowledged that the group would not have existed without McAlpin's leadership and influence. McAlpin offered an apology for his actions, but it was met with little consolation from the victims, who held him responsible for orchestrating the horrific events at the Braxton home. Daniel Opdyke, sentenced to 17 years in prison, broke down in tears as he addressed the court. His emotional plea included an apology for sexually assaulting Jenkins, but it was insufficient to undo the damage. Jenkins, accompanied by his aunt, chose to leave the courtroom in response to Opdyke's speech. Opdyke pleaded for sympathy by revealing that he had been sexually assaulted by his father until he was 8 years old, attributing his actions to this trauma. He was also responsible for handing over evidence from the Goon Squad's WhatsApp group chat to the police. After his apology, he was led away in chains, weeping as he exited the courtroom. Hunter Elward, who had shot Jenkins in the mouth, was sentenced to 20 years. In a tearful address, he offered a heartfelt apology to the victims for his actions, expressing remorse for shooting Jenkins and leaving him to bleed to death. Jeffrey Middleton received a sentence of 17.5 years for his role in obstructing justice and abusing the victims. Joshua Hartfield, who was sentenced to 10 years, was the only officer not affiliated with the Rankin County Sheriff's Department. His participation in the torture was attributed to his desire to join the department, where he had applied for a position. Hartfield used a taser on the victims and attempted to destroy evidence. During his sentencing, he choked back tears and wept as he apologized for failing to help those who needed him most. The man who got the longest sentencing was Christian Dedman. He was described as oppressive, sick, and the most sexually perverted of all the perpetrators for his actions. He threatened to rape the victims and poured multiple kitchen ingredients on them. Dedman was sentenced to 40 years in prison. He never addressed the victims directly, but he said that he would never forgive himself for the crimes he committed.
For, what, is given and what is done, I forgive that part. But other than that, he still did, what he did, and he has to be punished for that.
If I had to see them again, I would probably just start praying. I'd probably be scared out of my body.
While the Goon Squad lived up to their name, the same can be said about Desmond Mills and his sinister actions.
Desmond Mills pled guilty to excessive force and conspiracy to witness tampering today. He's now facing 15 years in prison. He's expected also to plead guilty to several other charges.
Desmond Mills joined the Memphis Police Department in March 2017 and quickly became part of the Scorpion Unit, a specialized predictive policing team. Scorpion, which stands for Street Crimes Operation to Restore Peace in Our Neighborhoods, was designed to utilize advanced data analysis and statistical algorithms to protect and prevent crime in targeted areas. Unlike traditional officers, the Scorpion Unit members, including Desmond Mills, operated in plain clothes and wore bulletproof vests labeled police. Their unmarked vehicles and covert operational methods allowed them to blend into their surroundings, making their presence less conspicuous to the public. This undercover approach was intended to enhance their effectiveness in identifying and addressing criminal activity discreetly. On January 7, 2023, Desmond Mills and 4 other officers from the Scorpion unit stopped Tyrie Nichols, a 29-year-old African-American FedEx worker and amateur photographer. At 8:24 p.m., just 2 minutes from his home, Tyrie found himself in the midst of a harrowing encounter that would tragically alter his life. The encounter began with the officers pulling Tyrie from his car and throwing him to the ground. As they tased him and issued threats, another officer further escalated the situation by deploying pepper spray into Tyrie's face, intensifying his pain and confusion. Despite their efforts to subdue him, Tyrie managed to break free and fled, prompting the officers to give chase. The situation escalated when the officers caught up with Tyrie Nichols. What followed was a brutal and unrelenting assault. Desmond Mills, armed with his baton, delivered merciless blows to Tyrie, while another officer pummeled him in the face. A third officer joined in, kicking Tyrie's torso with force, causing severe injuries. Throughout this ordeal, Tyrie's desperate cries for his mother pierced the night, but no one came to his aid, leaving him to endure the relentless beating alone. Paramedics arrived at the scene and Tyrie was rushed to the hospital in critical condition. Despite medical efforts, he succumbed to his injuries 3 days later, leaving behind a devastated family and a community grappling with shock and sorrow. Tyrie's family attorney has accused the police officers of torturing Tyrie to death, an allegation that has prompted the Tennessee Bureau of Investigation to launch a probe into the excessive use of force during his arrest. 2 weeks after the tragic death of Tyrie Nichols, on January 24, 2023, the Department of Justice and the FBI announced that they would open a civil rights investigation into the case. This decision heightened the scrutiny of the officers involved and added a layer of federal oversight to the local investigation. In the days that followed, the 5 officers implicated in Tyrie's death were placed on administrative leave and subsequently fired from the Memphis Police Department. Their terminations marked the end of their careers in law enforcement. The investigations culminated in the arrest of Officer Desmond Mills and his 4 colleagues, who faced serious charges including second-degree murder, aggravated assault, kidnapping, official misconduct, and oppression. Despite the gravity of these charges, all 5 officers were granted bail and released shortly after their arrests. The Scorpion unit, the task force to which they belonged, was disbanded in the wake of the scandal. In November 2023, Desmond Mills pleaded guilty to the state charges as part of an agreement with federal prosecutors. Desmond agreed to testify against the other 4 officers at their trials as part of the plea agreement. The prosecution recommended a 15-year sentence for Desmond. However, Desmond's sentencing hearing, originally scheduled to be held in May 2024, was postponed until November. He will be free until then. Desmond Mills' role in a deadly abuse of power was shocking, but the next case exposes another horrifying betrayal of authority. Marcus Eberhart, a former officer whose actions during a stun gun incident led to a tragic and preventable death.
Sergeant Eberhart guilty on all counts and Corporal Weems guilty of involuntary manslaughter, reckless conduct, and oaths of office. Now, the 2 were accused of tasing 24-year-old Gregory Towns to death back in April of 2014.
This is Marcus Eberhart, a former police officer from East Point, Michigan, who ignited a nationwide debate in 2014. Alongside fellow officer Howard Weems, Eberhart tasered 24-year-old Gregory Towns to death. On April 11, 2014, the 2 officers responded to a domestic violence report from Towns' girlfriend, Aisha Smith. She had called the police, alleging that Towns had abused her, prompting Eberhart and Weems to visit the house. According to testimony, Towns attempted to flee upon seeing the police. After being caught and handcuffed, Eberhart instructed Towns to walk to the patrol car. Towns, claiming he was too exhausted to walk, refused. In response, Eberhart and Weems used their tasers on him repeatedly until he became unresponsive. Their intention was to force Towns to comply, but their actions resulted in his death. The prosecution called the act a violation because, at the time Eberhart and Weems tasered Towns, he was already handcuffed and struggling to breathe. Initially, the defense argued that it wasn't the taser that caused Towns' death, but an underlying health condition, a rare sickle cell trait, that coincidentally led to his unfortunate demise. Eberhart was eventually charged with involuntary manslaughter and felony murder. This wasn't Eberhart's first brush with controversy. Past records revealed a pattern of aggressive behavior. This case underscored the urgent need for reform in police practices, and the importance of accountability in law enforcement. During the investigation, it was revealed that Eberhart had used the taser on Towns for more than 40 seconds, far exceeding departmental policy limits. The defense argued that Eberhart was unaware of Towns' health conditions and was simply following his training to subdue a resisting suspect. Despite these claims, the excessive use of the taser led to Marcus Eberhart being charged for Towns' death. This case marked a significant moment in Michigan's history. It was the first time a police officer had been convicted of a crime for using a taser on an individual. Eberhart was eventually sentenced in December 2016. During the verdict, where he was informed that he could be facing up to 15 years in prison, Eberhart appeared indifferent, showing no emotion or reaction. As the judge read the sentence, Eberhart seemed more interested in leaving the courthouse. His lawyer expressed disappointment in Eberhart's conduct, but offered little else in terms of defense or remorse. This lack of response from Eberhart further fueled public outrage and underscored the tragic impact of his actions on Gregory Towns and his family. Ultimately, Eberhart was sentenced to life in prison for his actions. While no recorded statements were made during the sentencing, it was reported that he released a statement expressing remorse. In his statement, Eberhart acknowledged the profound impact his actions had on Gregory Towns' girlfriend and child. He said, "I am truly sorry for the pain that I have caused the Marshall family. I am aware that nothing I can say or do can bring back their loved one, but I want them to know that I am taking full responsibility for my actions." This statement, while expressing remorse, did little to undo the damage and suffering caused by his excessive use of force. This case brought intense scrutiny to the use of force and aggression by police officers. For Towns' family, the conviction brought a measure of relief, knowing that Eberhart was held accountable for his actions. Aisha Smith, Gregory Towns' girlfriend, expressed a personal struggle with the situation. She stated that she would work to forgive herself for calling Eberhart and Weems to the house, despite the tragic outcome. Marcus Eberhart's disturbing use of excessive force left a victim in its wake. But the next case takes us into the world of unimaginable betrayal.
Hands! Let me see your hands! Step out here! Step out!
Officers rush inside.
Get on the ground!
Why anyone thinks it's okay to assault a child sexually is a question that remains puzzling. The actions of Michael Webb turned the life of a family in an otherwise safe community upside down in a split second. On May 18, 2019, an 8-year-old girl and her mother had been taking a walk down their street on Fort Worth 6th Avenue. The peace of that evening was shattered when 51-year-old Michael Webb came out of nowhere and snatched the small girl away from her mother. He was in a car when he reached out of the window and grabbed her, pushing her mother away. In a desperate attempt to get her baby back, her mother tried to fight with Webb, even jumping into his car and trying to get her daughter back. However, Webb overpowered her and pushed her out of the car, driving away. The entire ordeal was captured on a neighbor's security camera. The video showed Webb speeding away and the mother started to call for help. Police quickly arrived at the scene and members of the community came to the mother's aid, doing everything they could to find her daughter. Due to the gravity of the situation, the major task force of the Fort Worth Police Department was dispatched. A search was organized and pictures and flyers of the missing girl were posted everywhere. During this period, Webb drove to a church parking lot and went into Forest Hills Wood Springs Suites Motel. Towards midnight, a breakthrough came when a tip led officers to Webb's hotel room. Webb knew that the police were around, so he threatened the small girl to keep her quiet, and then hid her in a small laundry basket. When the officers checked the room, they did not find the child or any traces of her. Even though they left at that time, they were soon given another tip that led them back to the hotel. A family friend of this missing girl saw Webb's car and called 911. The police responded immediately, and when they checked the car, they found blood on the front passenger seat. Officers went back to the hotel room, and this time, they let Webb know that they were not playing around. He refused to open the door, and they used a battering ram to gain access.
Hands! Let me see your hands! Step out here! Step out!
Officers rush inside.
Get on the ground!
This time, they found the girl more quickly because they found blood on the bed as well. They took the girl out of the laundry basket where she was still hidden and carried her out while they arrested Webb. The moment she was rescued was filled with a lot of emotion, with the police officers letting their colleagues know they did.
Hey, here she is! Got her! We got her! We got her!
Webb was arrested and taken to the police station where he was interrogated by FBI agents for more than 3 hours. He soon admitted to kidnapping and sexually assaulting the 8-year-old, as well as hiding her in the basket and threatening her life. He was charged with kidnapping, and in September 2019, his trial began. His trial only lasted 2 days, and the court was filled with tension during that period. Evidence of the kidnapping and Webb's confession were all shown in court. The victim's mother described her daughter as brave and strong, saying that the horrific incident does not define her. As expected, it took the jury less than 10 minutes before reaching a unanimous verdict. He was found guilty and it was time to pass judgment. In the meantime, a U.S. attorney addressed the court saying, "The defendant stole this victim's innocence. She knows that there is evil in the world. Evil has a face, and that face is Michael Webb's." Ultimately, Michael Webb was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. The girl's family and friends were relieved after they heard the verdict. Michael Webb's horrifying crime was unthinkable, but the next case is just as chilling. Jake Patterson, a man who meticulously planned and carried out the abduction of Jamie Claus, leaving a trail of devastation.
2. The first-degree intentional homicide of Denise Claus. I sentence you to life imprisonment without the eligibility for release on extended supervision.
Patterson was 21 years old when he first noticed the 13-year-old Jamie Claus at a bus stop on his way to a temporary job. This innocent encounter would spiral into something completely horrific. Patterson became obsessed with Jamie, and he began planning how to abduct Jamie. In October 2018, Patterson decided it was time to carry out his plans. The first time he tried, Jamie's parents were around and he was worried about being spotted, so he left. So on October 15th, Patterson wore a black coat and a ski mask before driving up to the Claus' driveway, armed with a shotgun. Before he left home, he had shaved all of his hair and taken a deep bath to avoid leaving any DNA at the scene of the crime.
Third trip to the Claus home for the purpose of kidnapping her. He took a shower and shaved his head and beard to make it less likely he would leave any DNA behind.
Patterson walked up to the door around 1 a.m. and tried to kick the door open. When Jamie's father tried to see what was going on, Patterson shot him, killing him immediately. Jamie's mother called 911, but she could not speak to the dispatcher. The two of them hid in the bathroom, but they were not safe from Patterson. He entered the bathroom, duct taped Jamie's hands, legs, and mouth before forcing her to witness the murder of her mother as well. Patterson dragged her into his car and drove away. Despite being in a small town, Jamie was not seen by anyone for 88 days. Patterson took her to his remote cabin and trapped her under his bed before blocking all possible spaces with heavy workout equipment that he knew Jamie couldn't move. When visitors, including his father, came to the cabin, he would hide her under the bed and threaten to hit her if she tried to ask for help. Jamie was forced to stay under the bed for as long as 12 hours at a stretch. This whole ordeal would come to an end on January 10, 2019. Patterson told her that he was going to apply for a job and left her under the bed as usual. When he left, Jamie used the opportunity to escape and saw a woman who she asked for help. The woman recognized her and called the police. Jamie told them who had abducted her, and Patterson was arrested. He quickly confessed to all of the charges and showed remorse for his actions during the investigation and hearing. He was teary and apologized to Jamie as he pleaded guilty to his charges.
Statement of Jamie Claus. Okay. Last October, Jake Patterson took a lot of things that I love away from me. It makes me the most sad that he took away my mom and my dad. I loved my mom and dad very much.
In court, the prosecutors read a statement that Jamie had written, describing how she felt about what he did.
I sentence you to life imprisonment without the eligibility for release on extended supervision. I am granting 134 days of credit already served.
Ultimately, Patterson was sentenced to 2 life sentences without the possibility of parole and 40 years. Jake Patterson's calculated abduction was horrifying, but the next case delves into one of the deadliest acts of domestic terrorism in U.S. history.
Find unanimous agreement. Count 1, guilty.
Tyrie Nichols decided to enlist in the United States Army in 1988 when he was 33 years old. He wanted to escape the farming life and decided that the only way to do this was to join the Army, since his other attempts had failed. Nichols had been initially married to a woman named Lana Walsh and was mostly a house husband. After Nichols joined the Army in 1988, Lana filed for divorce. After he enlisted in the Army, he was sent to Fort Benning, Georgia, for basic training. There, he found it difficult to adjust to the training regimen because he was the oldest man in his platoon. He was mostly called Grandpa by the other men. Because of this age difference from the others, he was made the platoon guide. It was at this time that he met Timothy McVeigh, another member of his platoon who he soon became close friends with. They bonded on their similar backgrounds. Both men grew up in white rural areas, tried going to college for a while, and were children of divorced parents. They also shared an interest in gun collecting and the survivalist movement. After training, Nichols and McVeigh were stationed to work in Fort Riley in Kansas, becoming even tighter friends. They also met another man named Michael Fortier and became a trio of friends. Nichols didn't last long in the Army though, because of a conflict with his ex-wife over childcare. He received a hardship discharge so he could go home to take care of his son. During this period, Nichols' anti-government views grew stronger. He lived most of his adult life in areas where mistrust and resentment of the federal government were common. Nichols followed sovereign citizen ideology and tried to renounce his U.S. citizenship by declaring himself a non-resident alien. This got him into trouble with the court over unpaid debts totaling $40,000. He refused to pay the debts. He also renounced his driver's license. After he left the Army, Nichols continued his friendship with McVeigh, and they soon started selling military surplus at gun shows. They started staying together at Nichols' farmhouse, and on April 19, 1993, they witnessed something that would change the course of many lives. They watched the siege of the Branch Davidian compound in Waco, Texas. McVeigh and Nichols were furious and somehow took it upon themselves to pay the federal government back in their coin. For 7 months, Nichols and McVeigh stole dynamite and basing caps, bought large quantities of ammonium nitrate fertilizer, and robbed an Arkansas gun dealer. They also bought diesel fuel and the truck they planned on using to carry out the bombing. On April 19, 1995, the Alfred P. Murrah building was reduced to a skeleton of iron and beams. The bombing happened around 9 a.m. and killed 168 people. 684 people were injured, and more than $324 million worth of property was destroyed. This deadly domestic terrorism act was planned and executed by Timothy McVeigh and Tyrie Nichols. McVeigh was the one who set off the bomb, but Nichols was essential in carrying out the plot as well. Nichols was at home with his family when the bomb went off. He soon learned that he was wanted for questioning, and on April 21st, he turned himself in. After Nichols' home was searched, many items that tied him to the bombing were discovered. They included blasting caps, detonating cords, ground ammonium nitrate, barrels made of plastic similar to fragments found at the bombing site, 33 firearms, anti-government warfare literature, a receipt for ammonium nitrate fertilizer with McVeigh's fingerprints on it, a telephone credit card that McVeigh had used when he was shopping for bomb-making equipment, and a hand-drawn map of downtown Oklahoma City. Nichols was charged with 8 counts of involuntary manslaughter of a federal employee, conspiracy to use a weapon of mass destruction resulting in death, 161 counts of first-degree murder, first-degree arson, conspiracy, and fetal homicide. The jury deliberated over Nichols' case for more than 41 hours over 6 days. While the death sentence was recommended for Nichols, the jury could not agree on whether he should be sentenced to death for his actions. So, on December 24, 1997, Nichols was convicted of conspiracy, first-degree murder, and other charges except for the crime of actually detonating the bomb.
We, the jury, find unanimous agreement. Count 1, guilty. Tyrie Nichols is guilty. Conspiracy to use a weapon of mass destruction.
Nichols was sentenced to 161 life sentences without the possibility of parole, and 48 years for his involuntary manslaughter. This sentence makes Nichols the convict with the highest number of life sentences in all of American history. As for McVeigh, he was sentenced to death shortly after he was convicted. Tyrie Nichols' role in the Oklahoma City bombing is one of the most devastating acts of domestic terrorism in history, but the next case is a different kind of tragedy.
Later, his family and the public would be shocked to discover that Jackson's uncle had turned him into the police.
On the 6th of July, 2009, Nathan Potter, a 21-year-old film student at the University of Wisconsin-Milwaukee, was shot and killed in an attempted robbery while walking near his River West apartment. There were 2 suspects in his murder, 19-year-old Derek J. Thomas and the actual man who pulled the trigger, 18-year-old Shondel Jackson. And both men were also alleged to have shot and injured another man about 12 hours later. Witnesses were able to identify Jackson from a group of photos, and evidence from both incidents suggested that the attacker had used the same .45 caliber handgun. Investigators were also able to find out about Jackson's accomplice, Thomas, who had been acting as a lookout. Both men were eventually caught about a month later, arrested and charged for their respective crimes before being detained. During a February 2010 hearing, the young Jackson's expression showed neither remorse nor sorrow over his actions, although he did eventually read out an apology. The father of the victim, John Potter, called his actions evil and petitioned the judge to give him a befitting sentence. Potter's mother also reacted to the situation, saying that Jackson didn't deserve any leniency from the court. Jackson was eventually convicted of his crimes, and on the 16th of April, 2010, he was handed a life sentence without the possibility of parole at the sentencing hearing. He was also handed 5 years for attempted robbery and 5 years for the non-fatal shooting which occurred on the same day. And the way he reacted shocked everyone in the courtroom. Nevertheless, Jackson still had the audacity to smirk at his victim's family as he was escorted out of the courtroom. Jackson's accomplice, Thomas, was handed a 12-year sentence for his role in the death of Nathan Potter, as well as the subsequent non-fatal shooting. Following the verdict, Jackson's family began to hurl insults directed at Potter's family, which more or less confirmed that he wasn't always influenced by the right people. But ultimately, he will have more than enough time behind bars to think about his crime as he spends the rest of his life in jail. Shondel Jackson's shocking sentence was a chilling reminder of how a single moment of rage can alter lives forever. But if you thought that was intense, wait until you hear about Ronnie O'Neal, a man whose horrifying acts and defiant courtroom performance left everyone speechless.
I did kill Kenyatta Barron, but I want you to tell it like it is if you gonna tell it.
That was a shocking confession from 29-year-old Ronnie O'Neal while he was in court after he was charged with the murders and attempted murder of his family. O'Neal fatally shot his girlfriend, 33-year-old Kenyatta Barron, at their home in Riverview, Florida in 2018. After murdering his girlfriend, he hacked his 9-year-old daughter named Ron Nevaeh O'Neal with a hatchet until she died. He then stabbed his 8-year-old son Ronnie O'Neal IV and thought the boy was dead. It was then that he poured gasoline into the house and set it on fire. Ronnie O'Neal was found and he initially resisted arrest until he was tasered by police. While he was taken into the police vehicle, he said that his victim, Kenyatta, was the devil and that the children were the devil's kids. Ronnie O'Neal IV survived the attack with severe wounds and was placed in the ICU. Investigation soon started and the details will make you scared. Kenyatta's daughter, Ron Nevaeh, was autistic and a special needs child. Her brother would later tell the court that Ronnie O'Neal had dragged her from her room into her parents' bedroom before he murdered her there. He did this because he wanted to get her away from the wheelchair she used to move around. After she was shot the first time, Kenyatta had called 911 as she was trying to get away from Ronnie.
911, what's the address of your emergency? What's going on? I think I got gunshots fired at 4365 Rose Garden. I think I just heard 3 shots. Possible warrant at the address. Hello? And I heard him say, call the police, and I'm not hearing anything else.
8 minutes after this call, another call came in. This time, it was from O'Neal himself saying this.
I just been attacked by some white demons inside Kiki. Kiki, her name is Kiki, and she tried to kill me.
He was eventually psychologically checked and deemed fit to go to trial. He chose to represent himself for some reason, and the case went to trial in 2021. O'Neal was charged with 2 counts of first-degree murder, 1 count of attempted first-degree murder, and 2 counts of aggravated child abuse. He was also charged with 1 count of arson and 1 count of resisting a law enforcement officer.
Evidence is going to show that we are under some of the most vicious, lying, fabricating, fictitious government you ever seen.
Because he represented himself, Ronnie cross-examined his son, who he had stabbed. Ronnie O'Neal IV testified to everything that happened and what led to the deaths of his mother and sister.
Did he do something to your sister?
Yes, he hit her with an axe in the head, and then in the back, and the back, and then the head.
Then it was time for Ronnie to cross-examine his son.
It's good to see you, man.
Good to see you too.
Did I hurt you that night of this incident?
Yes.
I did. And how did I hurt you?
You stabbed me.
Further on into the trial, Ronnie accused the prosecutors and law enforcement of fabricating and tampering with evidence to accuse him of killing Kenyatta Barron and her daughter.
And the evidence is going to show that law enforcement tampered with evidence to meet their such high burden of
As he delivered his closing arguments, Ronnie O'Neal suddenly blurted out that he killed his girlfriend.
I did kill Kenyatta Barron.
Ronnie O'Neal confessed to killing his girlfriend. According to him, it was true that he killed Kenyatta Barron, but he needed the prosecutors and law enforcement to tell it like it happened. He insisted that they fabricated evidence, but after his bombshell confession, while he was under oath, all that was left was sentencing. The jury recommended the death penalty for Ronnie after the session where he confessed to murdering his family. On June 21, 2021, he was given 3 life sentences without the possibility of parole, as well as 90 years to run consecutively. The case, which has since been dubbed the Riverview Murders, was described by the presiding judge as the worst case she had ever seen in all her career. As for the sole survivor of the murders, Ronnie O'Neal IV was adopted by Detective Mike Blair, one of the detectives on the scene of the murder. According to the detective and his wife, they didn't have it in them to leave the boy in the hands of the state, for the fear that he would be bounced from home to home. He was officially adopted 6 months after the murders. His name was soon changed to Ronnie Blair, and he revealed during an interview that he felt loved and as a part of the family. Ronnie O'Neal's explosive trial left the courtroom in shock, but the chaos doesn't stop there. Up next, we have Frank Delian Jr., a teen whose tragic and senseless actions would leave a community grieving and a courtroom stunned.
As Diamond Alvarez's mother began walking towards De Leon, a bailiff holds her back. That's when the situation escalates, with Diamond's uncle jumping in from the gallery and punching De Leon. De Leon's mother then jumps in and pushes Diamond's mother at one point, and the two fight in front of the judge.
Diamond Alvarez was unfortunately not around to witness just how much her family was ready to risk it all for her after her killer showed no remorse for the horrible end he gave her. Diamond Alvarez was 16 years old when she was brutally murdered by 19-year-old Frank Delian Jr. outside her home. On January 11, 2023, 16-year-old Diamond was shot 22 times when she took her dog for a walk. Her family heard gunshots, and the family called the police after their dog came back home without Diamond. Her family went to search for her, and her brother found her just before she passed away. According to her family, Diamond died in her mother's arms after they did all they could to save her. Investigations showed that the two were on the verge of a breakup when Frank shot her. The two were in a relationship when Diamond found out that Frank had been cheating on her and was in a relationship with someone else. They had dated for about 6 months before they broke up. Even though his murder trial began almost 10 months after he killed Diamond, he didn't show up to the first day of his trial. This caused many people to ask questions, and law enforcement officers confirmed that he was in custody. They said the reason he had missed the first day of his murder trial was because he had gotten into a car crash on his way to the court that day and had to be taken to the hospital to get treated for the wound. However, since he didn't show up to his first day, he forfeited the $250,000 bond for his bail. After his bail was posted, he was released, and Diamond's mother was fearful as he lived close to her. She said they had received threats after they had demanded justice for their daughter. After he didn't show up, he was sent to a county jail after he was released from the hospital. He was eventually charged, and Anna Mikado, Diamond's mother, had to appear in court for the trial. It would have been a painful but calm trial if Diamond's family had not snapped from the despicable attitude that Frank had displayed. He had shown no remorse whatsoever, and this caused Diamond's mother to lose it. As she was giving her statement, Diamond's mother told Frank how she felt about what he did to her daughter. Frank smirked at her, and nobody knew what Diamond's mother was doing until she started moving fast towards Frank. She was stopped before she could get close to him, but that didn't stop Frank from almost getting mauled by the rest of the family. While Diamond's mother was being stopped, her uncle sprinted to where Frank was standing and jumped at him fully with the intent of attacking. Frank's mother responded to this and tried to defend her son by attacking Diamond's mother, which caused Diamond's aunt to attack and try to beat Frank's mother. Her uncle was taken into custody, but he was eventually released without being charged with anything.
That was wrong of us because we're not monsters. But it's so much hate because I want my daughter back. And what he did it was horrible.
Eventually, Frank accepted a plea deal and was sentenced to 45 years in prison for the murder of Diamond Alvarez. The judge and jury ruled that Frank had to spend at least half of his sentence in jail before he was eligible for parole. It would seem that Diamond's family had other plans to attack Frank, but he was quickly taken away before they decided to risk it all and attack him again. The emotional responses of these people are more than enough to consider permanently allowing convicts to be hit at least once by the grieving families. Frank Delian Jr.'s case showed the tragic consequences of teen violence, but the next story dives even deeper into the mind of a remorseless predator. Enter Michael Madison, a serial killer whose horrific crimes shocked an entire city. Michael Madison, a serial killer who faced multiple charges such as 3 counts of murder, sexually motivated aggravated murder, kidnapping among others, was definitely not expecting to be attacked in court after what he did. Between 2012 and 2013, under 9 months, Michael had killed 3 women in Ohio before he was arrested. He was read his charges and the potential punishment for each of his charges before he was sent to court. Madison was born on October 15, 1977, to parents Diane Madison and John Baldwin. He was the result of an accidental pregnancy, and Baldwin claimed that he was not the father of Madison. Madison would grow up with his mother and her boyfriends, who all mistreated him as he was growing up. Not much was known about Madison until 2013, when someone requested that the police examine the case of foul odor that was coming from a garage that had been rented to Madison. Upon entering, they found a decomposing body inside and 2 more in a backyard and the basement of an empty house. The bodies were all wrapped in plastic bags, and they were all in close proximity to Madison's house. Eventually, the police got a search warrant to search Madison's house, where they found evidence tying him to the murder of these women. After a short standoff at his mother's house, Madison was arrested. The victims were identified as Shatisha Sheely, 28, Angela Deskins, 38, and Sherelda Helen Terry, 18. Madison confessed to kidnapping, killing, abuse of corpse, assault, and mutilation of the 3 women. The details of what he did to them are too gruesome to describe.
How you doing, Your Honor? My name is Tyrie. Right now, I guess we're supposed to, in our hearts, forgive this clown.
Van Terry lost all composure when Madison smirked at him, showing no remorse whatsoever. He jumped at Madison and was quickly stopped by deputies before the session was stopped for a short period, before order was restored with the help of the police. The jury delivered no mercy for Madison as expected, so it was not a shock when Judge Nancy McDonnell announced that there was a unanimous decision to give him the death penalty. After his sentence was read and Madison was led away, the parents of the victims expressed their feelings upon seeing their daughter's murderer pay for his crimes. Madison continued to pay for his crimes as he awaited his execution in prison. It was learned that the inmates of the jail he was sent to severely beat and injured him after they discovered what he did. He was hospitalized for 2 months before he was sent back to jail. However, when he got there, he was again slapped and had his head smashed on a desk for his crimes. 3 years after he was sentenced, his mother, Diane Madison, was killed from multiple stab wounds by her 28-year-old grandson, Jalen Plummer, who pleaded guilty to all charges. Michael Madison's horrific crimes shocked many, but the next case reveals a betrayal of trust from someone sworn to protect.
Official misconduct, fabricating evidence, false imprisonment, possession of controlled substances, and drug paraphernalia, and perjury. Wester joined the Jackson County Sheriff's Office in 2016, but it wasn't until 2018 that people started to question his actions.
Zachary Wester, whose father was a police officer, seemed destined for a successful career when he joined the Liberty County Sheriff's Office in 2015. However, within less than a year, he left Liberty County amid allegations of sexual misconduct. Despite these claims, the Jackson County Sheriff's Office, located northwest of Tallahassee, hired him in 2016. At Jackson County, Wester quickly gained a reputation for his assertive and aggressive policing style. His high volume of drug arrests earned him recognition and respect within the department. Yet, as the summer of 2018 approached, investigators for the district attorney began to uncover troubling discrepancies in Wester's police reports and body camera footage. Zachary Wester's misconduct came to light when body camera footage revealed him holding a plastic baggie in his hand before searching a woman's vehicle, whom he later arrested for possession. This suspicious behavior prompted a thorough investigation into his actions. When investigators searched Wester's patrol vehicle, They uncovered ready-to-plant substances and paraphernalia in the trunk. Prosecutors argued that this evidence proved Wester had been carrying substances he used to plant on victims during traffic stops. The incriminating discovery led to Wester's suspension from duty in 2019. Later that year, the Florida Department of Law Enforcement completed its investigation, resulting in his arrest. Following his arrest, prosecutors were compelled to drop charges in over 100 cases involving Webster from his 2 years with the Jackson County Sheriff's Department. One of the pivotal witnesses in Zachary Wester's trial was Teresa Odom, a victim of his misconduct. In 2018, Zachary stopped Teresa for a broken brake light and requested to search her truck. Despite her initial reluctance, Teresa consented to the search. To her shock, Zachary claimed to have found a bag of in her purse. Teresa adamantly denied having any drugs, but to avoid a protracted legal fight, she ultimately pleaded no contest and was sentenced to 4 years probation. Her conviction was later overturned once it was revealed that she was a victim of Zachary's deceitful practices. The defense tried to paint Zachary Wester as a dedicated family man and upstanding member of his community, emphasizing his regular church attendance and charitable contributions. His wife, Rebecca, begged for leniency, describing Zachary as a fundamentally good person who had simply made mistakes. Yet, the overwhelming evidence presented in court revealed that his actions were not just isolated errors, but part of a broader pattern of corruption. Zachary Wester was ultimately sentenced to 12 years in prison. The impact of his actions was profound, affecting numerous individuals and the community at large. In a measure of justice, the victims of Zachary's misconduct were awarded a $1 million settlement. This compensation seeks to address the harm and suffering caused by Wester's corruption, serving as a partial remedy for the extensive damage inflicted by his fraudulent conduct. In the next case, an off-duty Pentagon officer attempted heroism by killing 2 people.
Tonight, a former Pentagon police officer is facing more than 2 decades behind bars for a deadly double shooting in Montgomery County.
Meet David Dixon, a former Pentagon police officer who made headlines in April 2021. While off-duty and in the parking lot of his Maryland apartment complex, Dixon encountered a troubling scene. He reportedly saw 3 men attempting to break into a car. In response, Dixon drew his weapon and fired at the fleeing suspects. The incident resulted in the deaths of 32-year-old Dominique Williams and 38-year-old James Lionel Johnson as they tried to escape with the stolen vehicle. A third man, Michael Thomas, survived the shooting and became a key witness in the case. David Dixon claimed he had acted in self-defense, asserting that the burglars were driving towards him when he fired. However, video evidence contradicted this claim, showing that Dixon shot at the men after their car had already passed him, and there was no imminent threat to his life. Thomas highlighted that Dixon's decision to shoot was not a legitimate act of self-defense, but rather an attempt to prevent the theft of the vehicle. Dixon's attorney argued that he performed a heroic act by stopping the burglars from stealing the car. However, the surviving burglar, Michael Thomas, admitted to stealing the vehicle during a 911 call made after fleeing the scene. This incident was not an isolated example of Dixon's questionable use of force. In 2020, Dixon had previously pointed a rifle at a homeless woman who was wearing flip-flops in the lobby of his building. This pattern of behavior raised further concerns about his approach to using firearms and the implications for his actions as a police officer. Dixon was sentenced to 25 years in prison for his actions. Before being led away, he offered an apology in court, explaining that he had reacted instinctively based on his training, but expressed deep remorse for his actions. Despite his apology, the court's decision reflected the seriousness of his misconduct and the need for accountability in cases of excessive force. The sentences in this video are jaw-dropping, but the justice system always finds a way to shock us. These cases prove how intense and unpredictable the courtroom can be. If you think this was wild, the next video takes you even further into the most shocking and unforgettable punishments. Don't miss it.